All right, Hannah, can we go ahead and start?
Yeah, go for it.
Perfect. Well, hi, guys. I'm so excited today to share with you a talk that I've been calling the Intersex Experience, Brief Considerations for EMDR Therapists. Um, Starting with a content note, if you have dysphoria or if you have a relationship with your body and gender that is complicated, some of the content that I'm talking about today can be activating. So please, like, to take care of yourself, do what you need to do. I'm also in my home today, and so I have little dachshunds that might be coming in and out of the space and occasionally making noises. About me, my name is Marie. I use she, her, we. I am an intersex person. I live on the Oregon coast with my lovely spouse. I am a queer educator. I have autism and ADHD, and I am so excited to get to share one of my special interests with you today. I'm a consultant in training, 4 more hours, and we'll call that a consultant. I own a private practice that's primarily LGBTQ focused. Within that private practice, we do queer education, LGBTQ 101. We provide support groups for the community and for providers who are LGBTQ. Those are free. I've been doing work with a variety of LGBTQ clients with EMDR for a while, and intersex and EMDR for well before I knew that the word intersex applied to me. And then lastly, I'm admin moderator for 2 different active EMDR Facebook groups, Neurodiversity Affirming EMDR, and EMDR Therapists with Plural Systems and Dissociative Experiences, which is kind of a mouthful, but that's the we and she, her, we. That's the spouse taking care of the dogs in the background. Thank you, spouse. Okay, I wanted to start with, I am not an EMDR intersex specialist. I don't think those exist. I'm hoping to ignite conversation on the topic. What I brought today is just a collection of my own experiences with myself, with other intersex people, with my clients, with other clinicians who do this work and have run into these experiences. And some of it might be wrong. Some of it, like, I might be communicating and there's a specialist out there who's like, well, actually, I want to know, like, I desperately want to meet the other people out there doing this work. So please feel free to reach out, correct. This work is certainly a work in progress. Because again, I think I'm it. Okay, so enough about me. Let's talk about you. I am not here to make intersex EMDR specialist today. One, I don't think that really exists yet, hopefully. And there's just too much content, even just my own stuff, special interest, like there's just too much for me to info dump all of it. Maybe I'll make a book at some point. I'm hoping from today to just kind of give a framework for folks who are listening to have an understanding about what it means to be intersex, not just the definition, but what does it mean? What are the experiences? What are the things that tell you that something is an intersex experience? And then, like I said, we're not here to make specialists. I'm not here to have you guys go out and that's your new thing now. I'm hoping that from what we share today, you'll do what I did in the beginning, and what my colleagues that I've talked with about this stuff has done. You look at the pre-existing domains that you already are experts in, that you're already specialists in: chronic pain, medical issues, fertility, gender identity, intimacy, adoption, dissociation, and you start to just add this extra lens of, but what if also intersex? Or, but what if because intersex? Just to help enhance the work that you're already doing. Okay, so let's roll into why does it matter? People who know that the word intersex applies to them are at least as common as redheads. I see we have at least one redhead in the space today. If you've worked with somebody who's a redhead, whether or not you know it, you probably worked with somebody who's intersex. Current best estimates are that 1.7% of the population knows that intersex traits apply to them. And then I'll have you notice I keep saying knows it applies to them. It is not uncommon for intersex people to not know that that word applies to them, like me. So if so much of the population already knows, how much out there have these life experiences but don't know that word, which is why it is so important for us to know not just the word and what it means, but what those experiences are and where they might show up in the work that we're doing. Okay, what is intersex? Interact Advocates for Intersex Youth says the I in LGBTQI stands for intersex. Intersex is an umbrella term for differences in sexual traits or reproductive anatomy. Intersex people are born with these differences or develop them into childhood. There are many possible differences in genitalia, hormones, internal anatomy, chromosomes compared to the 2 ways that human bodies develop. So that's like one of the official definitions. The intersex community acknowledges individuals who have shared experiences living with variations in intersex traits, both primary and secondary sexual traits, genetics, hormones, regardless of a person's medical standing or previous knowledge of the intersex status. Like I said before, it's not uncommon for intersex people to be unaware that the term intersex applies to them. That was my experience. However, except in some cases where you don't know because of genetics, or it's not immediately obvious. Outside of those cases, most intersex people can point to recognizable patterns in their bodies and in social experiences. Even if they don't know the word, they have known for years this othering, this pattern. The clues are in our bodies and in our past experiences, whether or not those experiences are medical. Okay, I'm going to dive into the intersex experience I'm most familiar with, which is my own, and kind of use it as like a case study for y'all to start thinking about the work that you already do, the niches you already have. And as you're hearing my story, picking out like, oh, this is where I do this. Ooh, I do some resourcing here. Ooh, bet we'd end up doing some targets in this section. Because again, you're probably already doing the work. We're just adding an extra lens. Okay. One of the things about intersex is that there is a medical model where the word intersex is something that doctors had used for a long time as an umbrella for a list of diagnoses. And that is problematic when it relates to an identity. The intersex community has taken that word and gone, yes, and, because there's so much more than just, here's these medical things that are wrong with you. There is life experiences, some of them that people find uncomfortable or not them, and some that people are like, yeah, this is me. There are some life experiences that don't fall under that medical model, but the intersex community goes, those are us. And that's part of my story. The biggest group of people that fall under this, accepted into the intersex community, but not under the medical model, are people with PCOS. Some people with polycystic ovary syndrome have life experiences that firmly fit into the intersex experience. And I can't think of another identity that better encompasses those pieces. And that's where we'll start with me. So I grew up always knowing I was a medical oddity. Even as a little kid, or as early as I can remember, doctors thought I was interesting. I was a year younger and always a head taller than everyone. I had very dense bones and short muscle fibers and big shoulders and something in my medical records about my pelvis being masculine stuff. I was interesting, and I didn't know the word intersex applied to me. As I started to hit puberty, I was so excited. I was so excited because I was like, yes, like my body's going to start doing things. I'm going to stop being this person that kids are like, are you a boy or are you a girl? I was like, boobs are going to happen. And shit got weird. At first, it was like I was just waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting for puberty. I was 6'1" in junior high, and my voice dropped. And I don't know if you know this, that doesn't normally happen with ladies. I developed body hair. I started bulking up because I was doing like sports stuff. And the doctors were like, oh, this is very interesting. Your muscle fibers are short, like a dude. Oh, interesting. You have testosterone that's higher level. And it was awful. It was mortifying. My body, it felt like dysphoria. It felt like it was betraying me. It wasn't me. I felt so incredibly grateful for hormone birth control because when eventually my period started, they put me on it. And while my body didn't know what to do with those hormones, and so there were some consequences, I went from an A cup to not an A cup in my sophomore year of high school. I came back in the summer with all the boobs. But because my body didn't know what to do with it, and because the doctors didn't know what my hormonal needs were, I also developed like a beer belly, a gut, and gained 60 pounds over the course of 3 months. And I didn't know that the word intersex applied to me. And the doctors didn't know that the word intersex applied to me. That experience is so common in the PCOS community. And we hope we catch them at the beginning. We hope we catch people at the beginning of this experience and get them to the right doctors who know. But the word intersex is so restricted in the medical community, and there's so little education that we didn't know. I didn't know. Other areas where intersex showed up in my life and affected things. Talked a little just briefly already about like socially as a kid, people being like, boy, girl, like what's the deal? As puberty happened, it got worse. Goodness gracious, it got worse. While every sports captain everywhere for everything wanted me desperately to play, I didn't want to be masculine. I didn't want to be anywhere in anything that might accompany that. So I stayed away from even things I wanted to do. because they felt like they were associated with masculinity, and I did not want that. I became super, super hyper feminine in what I wore and how I presented myself. Even like past the point that was me to like make my body and my gender expression line up some. And still, my first kiss was a gay boy who thought I was just boy enough that he could tell if he would ever like a girl. Also surprised, no, he's very gay. Not boy enough. So my first boyfriend broke up with me because, and I quote, "You're too masculine." I was like 13, and those I still remember. Remember his face, I remember the words. As I grew up, I continued to have medical complications and issues with the medical community. Even once, got on a better combination of hormones and things so that my body settled a little bit more. There was a constant fight of trying to find a doctor who understood my specific hormonal needs, and wasn't just filing it under like fat phobia. I had a doctor that said, I don't know it, Marie, it's calories in and calories out. Your food log is lying. And that was because he didn't understand my particular blend of hormones. You have to treat it almost like I have diabetes. Like my particular blend of hormones requires extreme sugar restriction, or my hormones just take that and turn it into fat. And I didn't know I was intersex. Last year, because of medical complications of my stuff, I ended up having a hysterectomy and an oophorectomy. And afterwards, they put you on hormone therapy, where they replace what you were supposed, like what your body was supposed to be making. But after my surgery, my body stopped making as much testosterone. And I had more estrogen than I've ever had in my life. And I'm very happy about it, because it was like, well, it was like somebody who has gender dysphoria or who's trans. When you go on hormone therapy, and my body started making the changes that I wanted since I was a little girl. And I didn't know when I was little that the word intersex applied to me. When I started doing EMDR, and when I started private practice back when I was a baby therapist, I became so interested in LGBTQ community and like trans and queer stuff. Part of that is my spouse. Like I've married a gender queer person. My best friend is trans. But the experience of gender dysphoria, it was like I longed for it. I yearned for it. I was like, that's a word. Gosh, I wish that a word could apply to me. Also, shocker, if anybody has ever felt that, if you're like, gosh, I wish gender dysphoria applied to me, it does. Like you can have it. So like that's where I specialized. That's why like I'm a queer educator. I was like, yeah, like trans stuff, dysphoria stuff. I loved it. And I still didn't know the word intersex applied to me. It wasn't till I think it was 2021. So like a year and a half, 2 years ago, we were doing it was either a class or one of our free support groups. We have something that my spouse has made, that it's kind of like the genderbread person, if you're familiar with that, but it goes a little bit more in depth. And I'll hold on, I'll share it because I'd love for you guys to see. It is disabled sharing. That's okay. It's on my website, Out of the Rain Counseling, or out of the rain.life under our LGBTQ resources down on the bottom under the intersex section. There's something called the spectrum of self, which my spouse has made, and it goes in depth into it's like an introspective activity for understanding your own body, gender, and then like sexuality and stuff. But it goes under like, you know, what is your physical sex, how masculine, how feminine, how, here's a third box, fill it out there. What's your gender expression? Fill this out. And I had done that activity dozens of times with my spouse and in groups. And I knew that every time I did it, I was like, okay, well, my physical body is
this it,
you know,
Marie?
yes, there's oh, thank you. Yes, that is it right there. We made that. I say we, I mean my spouse. They did. It's available for free or for purchase. So we're doing this. Can you scroll to the next page? There it is. See these little arrows? And I knew in the physical trait section, I always like have female, but I also had masculine. And then I also had like some other, because there was shit that didn't line up with either. And I still didn't know that the word intersex applied to me. I'm an educator, but like, this is what I do. And somebody in one of those groups, thank you, Hannah, that's just fine. Someone in one of those groups, while we're in the middle of filling this out, asked the important question. They go, well, how do you know if you're intersex? And I paused and I thought about it. And I was like, well, I mean, like, you know, if you're gay, you know, if you're lesbian, like, I know that I'm like polysexual, because you just like, you know, there's life experiences, there's things in your body that tell you. And as I was processing that, I was like, well, but no, because like I have these life experiences and things with my body. And if I was intersex, I would know, which was hilarious to have said out loud. So we went and looked it up in the group. We're like, we have no idea. Let's go look. We know the term. We know what the term means. And there in the middle of this group that I'm supposed to be teaching, I learned that the word intersex applied to me. I learned that there was people in a community and that longing for gender dysphoria was gender dysphoria. That feeling like my gender didn't match my sex was because my gender didn't match my sex. For me, there was so much relief and grief and frustration. The term intersex and knowing that the term applies to you can cause such relief. And it can be such an important thing to give language and community to people. Not everybody, and we'll go into that in a bit. But for me, it was so important. And I got so excited about applying this to EMDR because like brain stuff, EMDR, you know, that's some of my special interests. Like I love it. It makes my brain tingle. So I went looking. I got to find every article, every podcast, every post, every person out there who had written or done anything on intersex and EMDR, and like I was going to do it. I couldn't find anybody. I couldn't find anything. Google Scholar has thousands of articles on EMDR. When you put in EMDR and intersex, you get one result, just one. And it's an article about bisexual, gay, and lesbians with EMDR. And there's a footnote that says, there are special considerations and knowledge that you need to know if you're going to be applying this work to other LGBTQ identities. And there's a list of identities, and the very last one is intersex. One 1.7% of the population know that the word intersex applies to them. But there are so many of us that don't. And if this is so much of the population, we need to be having more of a conversation about it. We need to be knowing some about what it means. We need to be filtering like the lens of what the work that we're doing and going, oh, I wonder if this thing that sounds like gender dysphoria is gender dysphoria. I wonder if this is intersex. Because for people like me, so much of my trauma and so much of my stuff needed to be filtered through that. Fortunately, I had a lovely EMDR therapist named Susan. She is a trainer, and she didn't know jack about intersex, but she was able to listen, and through her own specialty, what she already did, I was able to work through this stuff. I don't need you guys to be specialists in intersex. We just need you to know just enough in the work that you already do to be a little bit more effective. With the rest of our time, I'd like to go through some of the different like specific categories where I have considerations for treatment that I've collected. Some of those are just there's symptoms that people are bringing to you. Some of them are like general categories. Some of them are going to be like targets. And then I have no idea when we started, but depending on when I get done with the end of that list, if there's time, I'd love to answer questions. Folks are always welcome to reach out to me on back channels as well. My website is outoftherain.life. There we have in our LGBTQ 101 or LGBTQ resources section at the bottom, there's a whole host of links on intersex. How do you know you're intersex? That the interact community that I talked about. Some of the statistics that I've talked about today. In our store, there's stuff that like it's choose to pay. So like if feel free to just download it. We have the spectrum of self, that activity that, you know, eventually I like I had found out the word applies to me. We also have my crusade is on there, and that's a brochure that we made together. That's how do you know if you're intersex? Because it didn't exist. That brochure didn't exist. So it's there. It's free. Please, dear God, go there, download it, share it to people, have it in your lobby. If nothing else, that is my big crusade. We also have the LGBTQ 101 trainings coming up. They're called Safe Zone. We have one coming up in April that's a Safe Zone for therapists. Feel free. We do a small fee on it, but if anybody wants to learn more about this stuff and wants to dive into it and wants to dive into those activities yourself about like my own gender and identity, but you can't afford it, please reach out. Like I just want this knowledge to go. I want people to know that the word intersex applies to them. Okay, the different sections that I have to talk about are how people found out, identity, medical issues, family of origin, fertility, intimacy, and dissociation. So for people that already know the term intersex applies to them, the work you're going to be doing with them is different than if they find out they're intersex in the middle of your work. So if they already know the areas that come up are, it's so broad. Intersex applies to so many experiences that you really have to know that there's a large menu of how people found out. For some people, those are traits that were noticed at birth and they've known their whole life. With that, there's this, you have always been a medical oddity. You've known you've been a medical oddity. There are so few doctors that are intersex specialists. Instead, it's always, you're the first one. And they're like, ooh, interesting, I have to go find out. Some intersex traits are noticed at birth, but the people aren't told. I think that's one of the more traumatic ways of finding out that I've experienced with people. And that's where they are adults and they found out in their childhood their identity was covered up or was just thought not important. Others don't find out until puberty, when changes start happening to their body, medical issues happen, they go, and somebody hopefully gives them the word. Sometimes people don't find out until they're adults, when infertility issues or other medical issues come up. I ran into some interesting stories about like people who were doing like 23andMe or like other like chromosome tests, and they're like, surprise, your chromosomes are weird, or surprise, sir, this says you're a lady. So just the moment of finding out can itself be an extremely important target, and something that you want to be checking in on phase 1 if this is somebody who knows that they're intersex. The next section is identity. So for me, not having an identity, not having a word to encapsulate my experiences in a community was traumatic. And there are plenty of symptoms with that brought me to Susan. And there's certainly, once we found the word, or even before we found the word, there were plenty of targets of not having an identity, not having a word and a community. There can be issues with people who, when they find out that word applies to them, the idea of being LGBTQI is extraordinarily difficult for them for a variety of reasons. I have some folks that I work with who are trans, non-binary, that finding out that they're intersex actually like causes some disrupt in the identity, because, well, if my gender does match my sex, what does that mean? There's a lot there with, if this word applies to you, how does that affect your internal sense of identity? And how has your experience in the past historically with your identity been affected by this? I think the one where we're going to get like the most people that are already doing this work is medical, both issues with the medical community and like historical lifelong chronic pain or medical issues, because a lot of intersex stuff is bodies that are doing different things. When bodies do different things, we tend to go to the doctor. Whether or not those things are actually harmful, we're like, this is weird. Why is this? There are so many varieties of those experiences, some of them extraordinarily painful, some of them having a life of not being able to find somebody who knows how to help you, like my experiences, being a medical oddity. There is an unfortunate historical and still current in many places practice of surgically correcting non-conforming genitalia at birth, and the body remembers. We all know the body keeps score. Those kinds of procedures and body issues can continue to cause pain and medical issues through our life. So please, especially those of you that specialize in medical, somatic, chronic pain, be really looking at these primary and sexual sex characteristics, primary and sexual, secondary sexual, like pain stuff, and be thinking about this lens. The next is family of origin. This is highly specific. Family of origin can be an issue when people knew and didn't tell. Why did they know and didn't tell? Is it shame? Is it just they just didn't know? Do they have a good relationship with their family or don't? It can be, now I know this word applies to me. How's my family going to take it? Coming out, even if you have an accepting family, is always nerve-wracking. And especially, I've seen a couple of folks that are fairly, come from fairly closed-minded or families with lack of education. In the US, we might say some of them more conservative. Learning that the word intersex applies to them and their sex is terrifying to discuss with their families. And in the work that I've done, I found the most complicated ones, or the family of origin issues that contain a lot of grief and complexities, are adoption issues. If you look up adoption stuff to like adopt a baby from out of the US, a shocking number of those children are listed with ambiguous genitalia, like an enormous percentage. So especially with your adoption folks, if they know the word intersex applies to them, there is this family of origin area to do work in of, why did they give me up? The next section, I'm not a specialist in intimacy or sex therapy. I have two EMDR friends, a CP down in California and Dr. Tiff Lanza in New York, who do this work. And they've been very gracious in sharing how learning about intersex has affected their work, which is why I've added this category. And as I had been thinking about it, I was like, oh yeah, this applies to my stuff too. When you have a condition that affects your sex, your actual genitalia, your secondary sex characteristics, that really complicates intimacy, whether we're talking about actual like physical intimacy and sexual acts, or just having pleasure in your own body, or even just like dating stuff. There can be pain, there can be a lot of shame around your own body, and inviting another person to engage with you in your body, feelings around your own gender and performance in these activities. There is so much there. If you are already doing that work, if you are a sex therapist, please, please, please be looking at this lens of intersex, whether or not people know, because you guys are going to be ones that are probably catching folks that are intersex, because you're going to be catching these like complications between, I'm a woman, but I don't feel woman enough. It starts to kind of look like gender dysphoria. In some cases, intersex is huge. There's a lot. Things like micropenises or very enlarged clitorises, those things are also things you're just going to be paying attention to. Those are things that fall under the intersex umbrella. And the last is dissociation. So dissociation is not a dirty word. I myself live as a system of parts, but as many of you know, dissociation is just a natural and organic way that our body helps us stay distant from pain, stay distant from experiences that are so much. And if you grow up with part of the intersex experience umbrella of pain, surgeries in childhood, dysphoria, if you grew up with like these experiences that are just painful to be present for, like, of course, we're going to have more dissociation. Of course, we're going to have more separation to have survived that. So monitoring, if you're people that do a lot of dissociation work, how disconnected are we from our body, from sex, from gender? Are we having strange pain in our genitalia, and this person is adopted and they knew there was, surgeries when they were little? What kind of surgeries? So those are just some of the things we want to be having a lens over. I that's it for now. There's so much more. There's so much more I want to talk about and learn and research. Important takeaways from today are um, I really would love for folks to learn to just know more about what it means to be intersex, and that you don't have to be specialists to do this work. Like I said, my therapist Susan didn't know Jack, but she did this job just fine with just a little bit of information. That information is available on our website, or you are welcome to go find it elsewhere. If you find it elsewhere, please let me know and I'll add it to my website. And I'm hoping that people start talking about this. I'm so excited to get to do this today because I think this is the first thing that there will be out there on intersex and EMDR. If you have questions, please ask. If you want to do research or collaborations, reach out. And I hope that people start talking about this more. I have no idea how much time we have, but I'm available for questions if we have time for it.
Yeah, I think if people have questions, we probably can take questions for a few minutes.
Sure.
And thank you, Marie. That was very informative. And I can also stop the recording in case I'm going to go just do that, because in case people have questions they don't want on the recording.